Two of the most powerful men on Earth flew across the Pacific, sat inside the Great Hall of the People, smiled for the cameras, and came home with 200 airplane orders and a vague promise about Iran. That's it. That's the summit. Oh, and the fate of the global economy was on the table. No big deal. Let's rewind, because to understand what just happened in Beijing, you need to understand the year leading up to it. Picture this. It's early 2025. Donald Trump is back in the White House, and he is furious. At China, at trade deficits, at the fact that for decades, America had been buying cheap Chinese stuff and quietly watching its own factories disappear. So he does what Trump always does. He pulls out the tariff bazooka. First it was 10%. Markets shrugged. Then 20%. Then 50%. Then 145%. A 145% tariff on Chinese goods. That means if a product costs $100 to make in China, America would slap an extra $145 on top of it just to let it through the front door. China fired back with 125% tariffs on everything American. This is what geopolitics looks like up close. Two guys in suits playing the world's most expensive game of chicken, except the car they're driving is the global economy, and neither of them has a seatbelt. Within months, U.S. imports from China dropped by half. American farmers watched their soybeans rot in warehouses because China stopped buying. Soybean exports to China fell 75% in 2025. 75%. Gone. Factories that had spent decades building supply chains around Chinese parts were suddenly scrambling, pausing production, laying off workers, watching their profit margins vanish in real time. But wait, it gets better. In February 2026, the U.S. Supreme Court looked at Trump's legal justification for the tariffs, a law called IEEPA, and ruled 6-3 that this law does not actually give a president the power to impose tariffs all by himself, which meant $166 billion in tariffs that had already been collected from over 330,000 businesses now had to be refunded. $166 billion. Collected, then refunded. Gone. Just like that. And what did Trump do about it? He immediately slapped on a brand new 10% global tariff under a completely different law. Because of course he did. By the time the Beijing Summit was announced, the US and China were both bruised, tired, and economically bleeding, but neither side would ever admit it. Here's what nobody tells you about the Xi-Trump summit. It almost did not happen. The original plan was to meet weeks earlier, but Trump got pulled into the Iran crisis, specifically the situation in the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which 20% of the world's oil passes every single day. That mess pushed everything back. By the time both sides finally agreed to meet in Beijing on May 14th and 15th of 2026, the expectations had already been inflated to ridiculous levels. Trump had floated the idea of a massive Boeing deal. 500 planes, he hinted. 500 big, beautiful American jets sold to China. The aerospace industry held its breath. Boeing shareholders started doing math. The numbers seemed to grow every time someone asked about it. So Air Force One lands at Beijing Capital International Airport, and stepping off the plane behind Trump are Elon Musk, Jensen Huang from Nvidia, Tim Cook from Apple, and a dozen other CEOs. America's most powerful business leaders, all flying to China on the president's plane. That is not a business trip. That is a flex. Xi Jinping pulled out all the stops on his end, too. State banquet, Great Hall of the People, red carpets, military guards, the full imperial treatment. Because Xi understands something Trump also understands deeply. Theater matters. Looking powerful is half of being powerful. Before a single policy was discussed, The images were already being broadcast around the world. Two men, two superpowers, shaking hands, both smiling. What could possibly go wrong? Spoiler: the details. Day 1. The cameras click. The handshakes happen. And then, behind closed doors, the actual conversations begin. Here's what we know they talked about. First, trade. Both sides announced what they called overall balanced and positive outcomes. Translated from diplomat speak, that means nobody set anything on fire today. U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods, which had peaked at 145%, were sitting at around 30% after an earlier truce. Still 10 times higher than before Trump's first term. Progress. Kind of. Second, Boeing. Trump came out beaming and announced that China would buy 200 jets. What everyone had expected was 500. What Trump had loudly promised was somewhere north of that. What actually landed was 200. And the moment that number hit the news wires, Boeing's stock dropped 4%. Because in financial markets, getting half of what you promised is not a win. It is a disappointment dressed up in a press release. Third, Nvidia. This one actually mattered. Jensen Huang, who was literally sitting in the room during the talks, reportedly secured a green light for Nvidia to sell its most advanced H200 chips to major Chinese companies. In a world where semiconductors have become the new oil, this was genuinely significant. Tech stocks jumped. Silicon Valley quietly exhaled. Fourth, Taiwan. And this is where the mood in the room shifted completely. Xi did not ease into it. He told Trump directly and bluntly that Taiwan is the most important issue in the entire U.S.-China relationship. He warned that mishandling it could lead to clashes and even armed conflict. The Chinese official statement said Xi stressed that Taiwan's return to China is, in his words, non-negotiable. The American side responded carefully. Secretary of State Marco Rubio told reporters that U.S. policy on Taiwan remains unchanged. Taiwan's foreign minister sent his thanks. The rest of the world quietly noted that Xi had walked into a two-day trade summit and managed to make Taiwan the biggest headline. Fifth, Iran and the Strait of Hormuz. China agreed, vaguely and without any specific commitments, to pressure Iran into reopening the strait. The U.S. agreed, equally vaguely, that China buying more American oil sounded fine to them. Both sides then released official statements describing the summit as constructive, stable, and forward-looking. A European Parliament member described it more honestly. He said, "You do not get the sense that much has been accomplished." 2 days, 2 world leaders, 2 of the largest economies in human history. The outcome was a broad framework, a few handshakes, 200 planes, and an extremely expensive photo opportunity. So what actually changed? Honestly, not much on the surface. And quietly, quite a lot underneath it. The summit produced what analysts generously called more vibes than details. There was no grand tariff reset, no breakthrough on technology exports, no Taiwan resolution, no written commitment on fentanyl, even though fentanyl is still killing Americans every day, flowing through Chinese supply chains, and Xi's past crackdowns on it have a habit of quietly reversing after the cameras leave. But a few things did shift in ways that matter. The first shift is about framing. Both sides agreed to pursue what Xi called a constructive China-U.S. relationship of strategic stability. That phrase, strategic stability, is Beijing's preferred language, and it signals something important. China wants this summit to set the tone not just for Trump's remaining time in office, but for whoever comes after him. She is always playing a longer game than the person sitting across the table. The second shift is about supply chains, and they are not going back. Before Trump's first trade war started in 2018, China accounted for 22% of all U.S. imports. By the end of 2025, that number had fallen to just 9%. Companies that moved their manufacturing to Vietnam, India, and Mexico are not moving back to China. The global factory map has been permanently redrawn, and a two-day summit in Beijing does not undo years of expensive rewiring. The third shift is the one that hits ordinary people. The Trump tariffs added an average of $1,500 in extra costs per American household in 2026. American farmers have not fully recovered their lost Chinese contracts. Chinese factory workers who lost those export jobs have not recovered either. And those 330,000 businesses that paid $166 billion in tariffs that the Supreme Court later ruled were illegal, they now have to file individual lawsuits to get their money back. Each one of them, individually.
Good luck with the paperwork.
The fourth shift is the one nobody wants to say out loud. China won the optics of this summit. Xi chose the venue. Xi set the agenda. Xi made Taiwan the opening headline. Xi got the American president to fly to Beijing, not the other way around. That image, the American president walking into the Great Hall of the People on Chinese soil, is exactly the image Xi wanted the world to see. And he got it. Here's the thing about the U.S.-China relationship that never quite gets said simply enough. These two countries genuinely need each other. America needs Chinese manufacturing. China needs American consumers. American companies need Chinese markets. Chinese companies need American technology. The supply chains between them are so deeply tangled that when tariffs hit 145%, it was not just Chinese factories that suffered. It was American car plants that ran out of essential parts and had to stop production entirely. You cannot sanction yourself out of a codependency. That is just not how it works. And yet, both countries are spending enormous amounts of money and energy pretending that they can. America is calling it decoupling. China is calling it self-reliance. Both projects are real. Both projects are expensive. And both are moving far more slowly than any politician would like you to believe. The Xi-Trump summit did not resolve any of that. It did not even try. What it said, in the most expensive possible way, was simply this: let's not make it worse. For now. 200 planes, a vague Iran promise, a framework with a comforting name, and a third meeting already being scheduled for the fall. That is not peace. That is not war. That is two nuclear-armed superpowers bound together by economics and separated by everything else, learning, slowly and painfully and expensively, how to share the same world without destroying the thing they are both fighting over.
The most dangerous relationship in the world is not the one where two countries hate each other.
It is the one where they simply cannot afford to stop.